Here we go again. I need another coffee. Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is a 1969 Plymouth GTX, the ultimate Plymouth B-body. If you're not familiar with the GTX model, it's essentially a Roadrunner, but fancier and more expensive. For 68 and 69, Plymouth had a whole bunch of B-body models, but they were all essentially the same car. You could have the Belvedere, the Satellite, the Roadrunner, the GTX. They're all like the same basic thing. It's down to the different equipment that they screwed onto the car. If you don't know these cars, you could see a GTX and a Roadrunner next to each other, and you really wouldn't know there's any difference, aside from what they say on them. But there are some important ones. The big ones here under the hood. The GTX came standard with the 444 barrel. Same engine that could be found in like a Charger RT or something of the like there. The Roadrunner would come standard with the 383. Of course, either car you could upgrade to a 426 Hemi. Either model would come with the beefier suspension and 11-inch drum brakes. This car has been upgraded to discs, but it still has the 11s in the back. The other important differences are in here. The GTX, being the upscale car, would have things like wood grain and special door panels, and would tend to have bucket seats and a center console, although you could order the GTX with a bench seat and a column shifter. This car even has the factory tachometer, which goes here in a spot that's often blank on Roadrunners and other more basic B-bodies from this time. My favorite thing about that tachometer is how it very obviously does not match. That's correct. Your Roadrunner definitely wouldn't have that in the middle of the back seat. Quick note about those bucket seats. Note the headrests. Those became standard, in fact mandatory, in 1969, but being that this car was early production, with an SPD in October of 1968, they actually weren't mandatory yet, and it's possible to see 69s without them. F5 green, F8 green. Job number 1. Figure out why the wipers don't work. Well, when you turn them on, they work just fine, so I guess that's job done. Of course, I have to point this out. The air grabber. That's cool. They kind of added that on to the 68 hood for 69. Note they're just like knockouts there that the intake grills go in. I actually worked on a white 68 Roadrunner that had that added before. I really like it. It's just some neat hardware. Here's what appears to be an original matching air cleaner lid. You just have to love that stuff. Now this is a single 4 with an air grabber, so here's the base plate. As you can see, it's been painted and the paint's peeling off. We're gonna have to deal with that. Of course, there were versions of this for dual 4s or 3 2-barrel carburetors, but this is the basic single 4 unit. Now it's probably obvious this car has been restored. I don't really have a whole lot of history on it or anything, but it's a pretty good looking unit. There are some little things that are wrong. For example, this blackout paint is flat black. That's supposed to be Organosol. Organosol kind of has a texture to it, so fixing that is definitely on the list, but it's not what I'm here to do today. There's some other little departures too. For one thing, the valve covers. These are 1970 units. Note the push-in breather instead of the raised metal circle for the pop-over breather. And that's a C-body valve cover over there. You can see it's got a wire guide for number 7. We're not going to worry about that. No, my mission here is the same as always. Fix the wipers, which, again, I've already done masterfully by turning the switch on, and make the 440 run right. So let's dig into that. I have been informed that this thing previously had an Edelbrock 650. That was swapped out for a 750, which you see before you. I was informed that that was too much carburetor, which I assure you it's not. Apparently they thought it was running rich, and the way they decided to deal with that was by installing a fuel pressure regulator. I promise you that does nothing. That thing needs to go, and that has nothing to do with whatever the issues are. Right away, I happen to notice that the vacuum advance is run to manifold vacuum. In some situations with ridiculous camshafts, that can actually be really helpful. I don't know what this camshaft is like just yet. Unfortunately, we can't go back and ask the engine builder because he's no longer winning with us. So we're just going to have to see what this thing sounds like and use a divining rod or whatever to figure out what it needs. I did go ahead and test that vacuum unit with my mouth. Yeah, I could grab a vacuum tester, but that's like 30 feet away. Anyway, it works, which is kind of surprising. It's a very common failure. I wonder if the choke's adjusted right. It is. Also, I just got a whiff of bad gas. It's interesting. Or maybe I got a taste of it. Note the added electronic ignition. That, of course, wouldn't have been available for 1969. It's super common to see, and you can actually buy a harness from M&H now that puts it right in that position. I haven't even heard this car run yet, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and delete this just right off the bat. Currently, there's no pressurized fuel in it, probably. Saves me a gas bath later. More fancy GTX stuff. And of course, you can't forget the grill. Anyway, back to it. Got this line off and yeah, smelling more bad-ish gas. It's definitely been in there for a while, so that could potentially be contributing to a not great running condition, but we'll see. Hey, that's cool. It's an actual Mopar inline filter. Nifty. I cut this line and tried to feed it over the metal down there, you know, taking that regulator out of the equation. That line's not rubber anymore, so yay. Oh, also, these are fuel injection clamps. Not the right clamp for this application. If you're going to use a screw clamp, don't use these. Use the normal ones. Anyway, there is no flare on the metal line up here, so this just popped right off too, which is bad. You know, you don't want your fuel lines to just be able to fall apart. Here's the carb feed line I pulled out. Notice just a straight cut there with no flare of any kind. Yeah, it won't focus. Anyway, a rubber line can just work its way off of that. You need some kind of ridge there, something. Normally it's a little bubble. The line goes over that, and then the clamp goes on the back side of it. I don't have a tool to replicate that, but I can replicate a flare like this. Would you focus? Come on. This is actually for an inverted flare fitting. I'll try to not make it that tall so it's easy to get a hose over, but again, at least we'll have something. Here's the flare tool at work. Notice this is just a basic single flare. Again, it'll do something. That's the good news. They are kind of hard to get rubber line over, but it's what I got. Also note the vice grips, because pretty much every one of these flare tools, that bar there, they just wear out and they don't actually clamp the line tight. Here's another note on fuel line size. This is 5/16. A GTX with a 440 HP should have a 3/8 fuel line and a 1/4 inch return line. Strangely, this thing has a 5/16 feed line, but it has the return line. And that wasn't available factory at all. It should have been 3/8. It does have the 3/8 sending unit in the tank though, so just something to be aware of. You can run into a mismatch there. This engine will never use the amount of fuel the 5/16 line can pass, so it's not like it's a problem. It just makes fitting components a little goofy at times. Gates Barricade fuel hose. Basically the only good option these days. There might be others, but this one's supposed to be ethanol proof and should live a long and happy life on this car. There you go. 13 times less likely to pop off and burst into flames. Fuel system's back together with this thing out of the circuit. I'll probably remove it in a little bit here, but I guess we can finally hear this thing run. I do have a bit of a concern though, because I've been huffing this aging gas for the last hour. I could taste it. So that alone might be a bit of a runnability issue. Oh wow. Yeah, pretty sure I can dial a lot of horsepowers into this thing. Can't say I love the valve noise, but we're gonna ignore that for now. Look at how much of a difference this makes. Yeah. Now here's the problem with having your tune completely rely on that manifold vacuum. When you rev it, that advance goes away. And that's why we're getting the popping. Light throttle with that advance in play, it sounds pretty good. Now just so we're all on the level, this was a fresh engine and it appears to have a valve noise. So I'm a little concerned it might be eating a lifter or something. I did take the liberty of attaching a starter button and cranking it over. And it sounds really even. So if that is happening, there's definitely nothing major yet. Again, we don't really have a whole lot of history on this engine. We know it hasn't run much since it was built. Could be a concern. We may need to get under these covers at some point and check things out. But for now, I'm going to keep going as if everything's fine. It's so green. I like it. Admire the black on the bottom, and there's also a red pinstripe under that trim. Hey, while I'm thinking about it, I've fielded multiple questions about this recently, the Petty Blue 1973 Charger. It's off to the side while we deal with other quick projects. We're going to get back on this soon. The engine's in it, and the fancy 17-inch magnums are on it. I've got my two favorite tuning tools attached to this 440, a vacuum gauge and a dial-back timing light. Let's see what's what. About 14 inches of mercury with the vacuum advance disconnected, and that's actually actually not that bad. Okay, but it's timed at 0 degrees. That is not enough, friend. Even the factory sticker here says 5, and I can almost guarantee it really wants more than that. Well, let's see where this goes. Wow, it's actually tight. All right, hang on. Regular big block Mopar things. Don't cover gasket leak. I will cinch those down, but I don't guarantee it helps. This thing does smell kind of rich. I went ahead and loosened the caps here. They're jumping up when I flip the throttle just like they should, so the spring tuning is really close. That's interesting. I was able to screw those idle screws in like a turn and a half and it still idles. That might help to explain the rich smell. All right, here's my normal move. I'm just gonna grab the distributor and turn until it sounds the best and shows the highest vacuum. We'll see what that number is. Oh, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. Before. Yeah. All right, we can work with this. Wherever I just stabbed it, it's now showing 21 inches of mercury, and it's steady. That's a lot. All right, I dialed it back to 20, which as you can hear, it still likes. Got about 37 degrees total, so there's a 17-degree swing in that distributor. That's actually probably livable how it is. All right. One little thing I just did I wanted to point out. I see this a lot on these Edelbrocks. I had to adjust the choke that way a little bit. They almost never want to be here at the center mark. Back here, that's pretty much where they end up. That'll be perfect to close it when it's cold, and then when it gets hot, it actually will fully open it. Previously, every now and again, it would still get hung up on the cold idle cam here, so you don't want that. Note this thing does have the proper Edelbrock throttle adapter. The linkage is actually adjusted right. I know, I was shocked too. The spring setup's a little goofy here. I gotta work on that. So what I've got it at now, 20 degrees base, 37 degrees total, which may be a little much, but this is a big open chamber bore, so maybe not. And then I did reconnect the Advance to manifold vacuum. I'm gonna test it like that, see what it drives like. It sounds pretty happy sitting here. I do want to note here, despite that little noise and the bit of weirdness and my concerns about like a lifter or whatever, the vacuum gauge reading was always steady. I wasn't seeing any indicators of a dead miss or anything. And once I got the timing cranked up and tweaked the settings a little bit, this thing sounds pretty good. Let's drive it. Man, I was gonna reinstall the air grabber, but it's like living on the wiper motor, so guess we gotta figure that out. I happen to know that air grabber cars always have that 3-speed motor because it's laid over that way to make room here. What's hitting is the breather line, which is kind of odd. I think this is bent. Pretty sure it's supposed to be closer to the plate there. I don't know if I have another one here to compare to right now. Oh yeah, I do. Tom's 70 Roadrunner. Yeah, we'll figure that out later. Oh yeah. All right, small note. This has an aftermarket booster, which I don't mind. Yes, I brake with my left foot. I don't want to hear about it. Years and years of experience driving junk. Anyway, the pedal feel is really weird. Like the brakes are good, but it just feels like sinky. Does that make any sense? It's also really, really high, so the push rod needs to be adjusted. Your brake pedal should be a little higher than the accelerator, but not 6 inches. I've mentioned this many times, but you'll know I've done my job correctly if after I'm done, there's belt squeal. Another small note. The factory sticker said stick the idle speed at 650 RPM. I don't know what this cam is, as mentioned. I don't think it's radical or anything, but I can tell you at 650 and even 700, it wasn't super happy idling in gear. So I raised it up to about 850. Seems pretty good now. Obviously the tax says it's lower than 850. Yeah, those things aren't exactly gospel. All right, it's pretty good. And there's no pinging. Nice. Okay, there's a bit of a wobble. Going through the front end, replacing the lower bushings, and then doing an alignment is on our list. This thing has fancy tubular arms on it too, so we should be able to get it dialed. But that hasn't been done yet, so for now it's a little sketchy, let's say. Yeah, it sounds pretty good. Obviously, it needs a bath. Of course, just about everything you ever see me touch needs a bath. Because I'm still me, I didn't bring my phone mount today. Of course I didn't. It's just normal. Let's try it again. It shifted to 2 really quickly. That's interesting. Didn't do that the first time. Huh. Yeah, I'm sure you can tell it's wandering. We're gonna have to deal with that. Heavy load, no pinging, not even a hint of it. It's just happy here. I know I said the pedal feels weird, but the brakes work very well. Very well, yeah. I don't know what gears are in the rear end, but they're definitely not highway cruising units. This thing is set up to party. I'm kind of taking it easy here. Again, the fidgety front end, not the best. I'm trying to get a couple miles on it and just make sure everything's good. This car really has not done any miles since the engine was finished. At least that's my understanding. So, yeah, got to get some runtime on it and see what's what. I'm kind of smelling a hot plastic smell. Not sure what that's about. I'm going to pull into my normal spot up here and we'll just kind of take a look at things. Make sure nothing important is on fire, you know? Whee! Brakes. The idle speed raised itself a bit. I will probably have to tweak that a few times. I mentioned the valve cover oil leak. Yeah, I snugged the bolts up, but I'll tell you right now, it's not going to help. Those are rubber-coated fiber valve cover gaskets. Those are absolute garbage. They don't work. I don't know what Felpro was thinking, but seriously, they will not seal with these covers, or any covers for that matter. The first thing that's going to happen when you go to reef them down is they're just going to split and leak even worse. Been there, done that, more times than I could count. But it's been a while because I finally learned, don't even bother, just throw them away. I know this will come as a shock to everyone watching, but 440s do pretty cool stuff. They're neat engines. If you wanted a Dodge with that engine under the hood, in 1969, you would have bought a Charger RT, or Coronet RT, I guess. In Plymouth land, this was the guy. This was the top-of-the-line performance B-body. I suppose the fancy interior brings it more into the performance luxury segment. That wasn't even really happening in 1969. Well, it was. More in the full-size cars, I suppose. Anyway, I apologize for the inevitable wind noise. Someone complained in the comments recently that I need to buy one of those fancy microphones. No. I really like the GTX. I also can't remember what that stands for. Someone will tell me in the comments. Lord, man. Just Subaru things. Anyway, it's probably like Grand Touring Extremely Awesome. If you know these cars well, you'll know that these are not the correct Magnum 500 road wheels, whatever the heck they called them. For one thing, they're chromed instead of having a trim ring, and for another thing, they're 15-inch. I believe you could only get these on a Mopar in 14. I like the look though, they're nice. People often tell me I need to put this style wheel on my Charger, and I won't. I'm not going to do that. But they look nice here. The 68 and 9 Plymouth B-bodies are very similar designs. One of the things that did change, the taillights, as well as the surround and all of that stuff. I prefer the look of the 68 myself. It's a more flat light here, and it's got like a trim piece there. This one is super sunken in. You know, it's cool. It's just, yeah, make mine a 68, please. It's probably obvious from a good few angles that this car is not like a 100-point, show-stopping, trophy-winning, perfect restoration. It's not. You know, there's some little issues, and we're going to work through a good few of those here at Rocket. But it's a nice car. For the most part, it's very well finished. I think this hood's slightly tweaked, which is really unfortunate. I don't think you can just trip over these. Well, AMD does reproduce them for 68s. I don't know about 69, but anyway, it's an air grabber. It's still cool. I don't care. The car is missing the behind grille blackout. This F5 medium green, you know, it's a relatively dark color, but still, you can see it, and it would have been black from the factory. If I know Tom, he'll probably insist on fixing that. Where did these bugs come from? Go away! What are you? I've always admired the back window shape on these things. You know, I like the Charger more, but this is pretty cool. Really, all of the character lines on the 68 and 9 B bodies. And nifty stuff. They got rid of all of that for 70. 70 is a one-year design, you know, with the scoopy there. And that's cool too, but I don't know. I prefer these. They've got class. Sure, it's triple green with wood grain, but let us all be thankful it doesn't also have a green final top. Does your car have one of these? I bet it doesn't. I'm sure I've mentioned before I'm not exactly a fan of green. There were so many green Mopars around this time. It's way too many. And it's always the green ones that are still in good shape. Ah, here's another cool little detail. That GTX emblem is actually embedded in that trim panel, like buried in clear or acrylic or whatever the heck it is. Whoever ordered this car didn't want to pay extra for a convenience light here on the dash, so it's got the 3-screw blanking panel instead. I almost can't believe it, but the radio works! Wow. The heater does too. I have suspicions the temp control either doesn't work or doesn't work correctly because despite being in cold mode, I was feeling hot on my feet. That was weird. Randomly out of the corner of my eye. Yeah, I noticed the alternator gauge do that. That shouldn't happen. Okay. That was weird. Hey, this is odd. There are labels up here for the switches, but there are also labels down there for the switches. And there's no label for the flasher. Maybe there's a version of this dash that doesn't have the lower labels and this bezel is from that? I don't know, I'd have to ask Tom. This optional tack could also be an optional clock, which is why there's a hole here, you know, for the knob to adjust it. Did you know this same basic console design was used 1966 to 1970? Well, it was. Of course, this one has the wood grain applique on a panel there. Those actually screw on. Note the holes. Those are separate bezels. And under those bezels, you will find grooves like were used in, say, a 1968 Charger. There's even a tiny little piece for this trim panel here. There are grooves under that too. Those grooves would kind of match this, which for some reason they don't cover on these cars. No idea why. The 66 Charger console had a similar smooth top to this. Instead of being wood grain, it's like, well, it looks like brushed aluminum, but it's just paint. As well as being used in 66 to 70 B bodies, these consoles were also used in C bodies. This is a 69, so it does have the flip down ashtray. Some 68s have a sliding one, but not all, and I've never figured out what the difference is there. I'm not totally sure, but I think this thing has some kind of Detroit locker. Because it definitely pops as you're turning. Doesn't make any noise at all going down the road, so yeah, race car stuff. Yeah, something interesting anyway. I like this thing. It's pretty good. Of course, I kind of like all of these old Mopars. So did my whole thing. That was cool. The wind knocked a branch out of a tree back there and I barely had time to dodge it. Or Plymouth it? I do love the Charger hood, but looking over this one's pretty cool too. I'm not sure why these hood inserts look kind of frumpy like that. They could probably be straightened out, but that's definitely above my pay grade. I didn't slam on the brakes, I just, you know, used the brakes, and they were quite good. And then the oil light turned on, and it didn't turn back off until I got around the corner and accelerated. So either there's an oil pressure issue, or the wire fell off the sending unit and it's bouncing around behind the engine. The right turn signal does self-cancel, but can you hear that? It's still blinking back there. It's not fully self-canceling. I need to drive it more and burn all this horrible old gas. Then we can put some fresh premium in it, and then, well, it runs pretty well now, but it'll run even better.
Is this a problem? I need an expert minor internet celebrity opinion.
Yes. Problem, yes. It's not the wire, so yeah, remind me to check the oil level. I mean, we know it leaks. The grass is just getting out of hand back here. I could park the GTX like over there and you wouldn't even know it. As I'm sure you can tell, there's a good few things left to do on this car. We're gonna replace the lower control arm bushings. I'm gonna align it. You know, there are a lot of things to work through. Probably glance at the brakes, that sort of thing. And whatever was making the amp gauge dive, pretty sure it's a wiper motor issue because the wipers are dead again. Must be popping the internal breaker. That sounds like a future Jamie problem. The thing I'm best at, the thing I really enjoy, and the thing I'm glad I get to keep doing, is making these old Mopars run right. And as you could hear, this thing is, yeah, we're good now. Doesn't get much cooler than that, does it? Well, okay, the 1970 air grabber, you know, the door with the little guy on the side, that's pretty cool. Anyway, I reckon that'll do it for now on this 69 GTX. If I find anything else as we dig into the car more that you need to see, well, that'll be a future video. Until then, as usual, thank you very much for watching. And remember, it's not easy being green. Yeah. Nice one. Update. Don't wire your electric choke to the park circuit from the wiper switch. That's a really bad idea.